forward slightly. Look straight at the speaker and listen with a sparkle in your eye, as though you might be thinking, gee, this is the most wonderful thing I ever heard in all my life.
Already, we were back. Are we back?
We're back.
All right, returning here now, episode 386, Planet Green Tree's episode number, and we're with Jamie Lowell, the...
And Chad's back now. I think he's self-aware now.
This is a good topic that Chad might have some interest in, even though he's not allowed to talk because he has no self-awareness, but if we did let him talk, there'd be something he might be interested in. But turning to Jamie, who's the guest here, you know, there was a period of time when... Think about, like, I'm just going to assume everyone had the same similar experience, which is kind of silly, but, you know, the believing in medical cannabis, believing in cannabis as a medicine, right? Like, no one is here because they don't believe or understand it. Anyone? Because they'd have to get out right now if they don't. Okay, none of that stuff. But once we're past that... You know, the question, like, you know, to what extent, and I think, you know, my early active, you know, involvement was just the awareness of the possible and the, you know, anecdotal and the studies that began and the, I don't know, overwhelming evidence that just was more than just me believing in it before I saw it. It was that it actually began to develop in something that I believed and fulfilled a lot of the thoughts I had and reasons why I believe in. But Jamie, for a long period of time, was always somebody that was able to discuss some, you know, some of the interesting particulars, where we were able to provide information about various patient methods of being a patient and caregiving. And I, you know, like just because I think the location and the interactions with the various people from, you know. And I'm not saying this is stuff that I wasn't aware of, but again, I could just think of some of the things over the years, the different strains, because at certain time in Michigan, like you only heard or whatever, and of course, you know, obviously there's a lot of others in the world, but it's just like the variations of things and what we're called, and some of the different technologies you mentioned, from the hot rock to the vape pens and where they are right now, you know, but you know, even some of the Jamie introduced. We had a show on Planet Green about the juicing. Remember?
Oh yeah.
Which was
still love the raw cannabis juicing.
So let's talk about like that. That was thing that came. Remember, like there was like everyone's on this juicing rage for a little while, and we actually talked about it because it's, you know, as having it's the ultimate entourage, and it's a medical term I'm using, entourage effect, by having the THCA from the juice and the, you know, that was stuff that we were talking about back then. No one was talking about that. But I'm saying I remember Jamie being a plethora of information about that stuff. Chad likes to talk about that a lot too. I think he's not allowed to talk now, but he does like to talk about it. So what about that, Jamie Lowe? What do you have to say about that and comment? I know it really wasn't a question, but how do you count for that, I guess? And
that was well, starting with the juice. That's one of the many just really incredible things I learned about the plant along the way, and have been able to in turn, you know, share with other people. I worked at Third Coast for like 5 years straight or something like that, and interacted with many patients and saw them over a long period of time, and paid attention to what was going on, what was the most recent things. Kind of answer Amanda's question in conjunction with this. You know, as there's been more activity allowed, or people have felt more comfortable getting more engaged, and more technology and money being spent on things, and engineering new machines, and applying existing technology, and feeling more comfortable that have gone on, and now we're coming up with all these products, and, you know, some of them, you know, are pretty amazing.
They are.
And I know there's and just to throw in some, what I perceive as like a historical aspect of that, in those years that you're talking about, called like the time you spent in the mountains in the Himalayas, or the period of where like there's all this uncertainty, or you're just like meditating on
there's stuff going on during that time, of course. Yeah.
But different than it is right now.
Sure. Different
levels of evolutionary thought on some of the realities of where we are and whatnot. Much more uncertainty for sure. But my point I was going to make in trying to keep with the metaphor was the mantra at that time was the patient's medical use of cannabis, right? And everything about the conversation you were having in these scenarios where you were learning and developing was about that. Both because it's interesting and you want to be able to help service and provide for the patient, but it's just like a lawyer advertisement right now. Just roll with me here, because it was also the way to be in a position to defend oneself.
Taking an active interest in the patient is part of the spirit of the act.
The act, exactly. But I'm just thinking out loud, not that it's not part of the Jamie Lowell interview, but the advice at that time was if you're interacting with patients that you may not have immunity from, and you were to assume as a lawyer would have you do that they're wearing a recording device, and you delve into and ask questions about what their condition is and what was the last cannabis that they may have ingested, what was the format of it, and what impact did it have? Are they looking to what are the ailments they're looking to relieve? All those questions and listening to the answers,
and the quality of the relationship with their doctor.
Quality relationship with their doctor, bringing all those things out in that discussion. I would joke and say, like, well, if they're recording it undercover, let them play it in court. Let them play it and see what happens. But
I also just did that because that was I felt philosophically the proper way of dealing with our people. I mean, not everybody was interested in having a longer discussion or in talking about their condition and things like that. So, that interaction didn't happen with everybody, but very, very, many times I got to see people over, years and get feedback. The cancer patients using oil and shrinking tumors. Many places or people describe that, and it's because this works, and I've got to see that for myself a few times. Just amazing. I'm sure Amanda has too. I mean, anybody who's yeah.
People that were unable to speak after because of.
Yeah. And Amanda's describing a good experience, but now into the microphone.
Yeah, with oils specifically, this person had HIV, and unfortunately, it affected a portion of his. He wasn't able to speak. He used cannabis oil. It was a new thing for him. His mom brought him in to kind of, help him select something. And wouldn't you know, she came back and she said that it was very difficult to understand it, of course, but he spoke.
You have these moments where you're just like, wow, this is just amazing. This stuff works, and that helps us develop the passion for it.
I wasn't taken away from it by adding the dry and unemotional aspects of the law and the importance.
No. I wasn't saying you were. I just wanted to.
It's mostly sarcasm. I do want to talk about exactly what you guys are talking about, because there was a number of different groups that were, because there's that moment that I think everyone kind of has to realize, like, it's you want it to be the cure-all for everything. I can't tell the number of times that of anyone that I encountered anywhere during those early years. Oh my God, you got to what? Oh, you should, It's just because all of a sudden it was possible, like something like, and they'd probably be better off if they hadn't, if they, whatever, for whatever it may be, just, instead of drinking even, you know what I mean? It's not but again, that's not the purpose and nature of the Medical Marijuana Act, as it was originally written, for putting aside the personal views. But we begin to see and hear about these phenomenal stories that you then begin to tell the stories to people that are totally removed from this world, and they look at you cross-eyed some. But then and listen, I'm telling you, like, these are some of the truths. I think this is why everyone's still here, right? Whatever happens tomorrow, like, we're all still kind of hanging on this, because there's some real crazy truths that developed as this battle has been waged and fought. I mean, as we're talking about these things, all of a sudden, like, somewhere in this is Sanjay Gupta, started all of a sudden the maven, as his apology for ignoring the science for all these years, comes forward, and the epilepsy and the out west and the what are those strains, the whatever brothers, What's her name?
Stanley Brothers.
Stanley Brothers. They of course, commercially, who knows where they are right now and when. But let's just stay on the patient side because there are these phenomenal stories, Jamie. There's a lot of people from Third Coast that
Well, I mean,
spoke out, and some of the rallies.
Just to bring up the timeline a little bit along these lines. I mean, during that time when I'm working at Third Coast consistently, I mean, early on we also helped to form the first industry association, and we also initiated what eventually became the MMFLA by helping to get the initial language written and get Carlton to introduce it. There's some really cool stories that go along with that are significant and all this. Maybe we'll get to that if you want to talk about some of that stuff. So Daryl Stavros, we haven't mentioned yet, my original partner, also still there. Kind of took on the day-to-day operation, overseeing generally the running stuff. And while I was there working, I also was the person who did more of the participation in the groups and things like that. And that organization, also helped to get some of these testimonials in front of the right people, oftentimes in Lansing, and other groups did too. Again, this was all going on, but that was one of the functions that we had, and brought them to local meetings as well, and had some success with that. And so that was one of the things that we focused on. And these amazing stories sometimes were very moving to those people. It's one of the things that kind of cracked the ice. And then we find out later that sometimes somebody's close to somebody who's benefiting from cannabis, and they're more open to understanding that it's real. We've seen those minds change through these testimonials, and this really awesome stuff that we've experienced happening when people start using this.
I don't want to, I think, Chad's not in here, and I don't want to argue for him because his voices shouldn't be heard tonight for his bad deeds. But there's an argument about like the the effects that some of these facilities had on the movement, on the MMA, the impact it had on some of the police and policies that were developed, or Schuette's, development of the policies. And I want to, I do want to talk about, and let's give that a time frame of what, 2013-14, right? Jamie? Where I didn't give you, when the involvement with Carlton, the funny stories associated with what later became the MMFLA is born out of the year 2013-14. Right?
Oh man, no, before then even. Yeah.
Fine. But I'm saying I don't know, whatever the time frame of the stories are. Before we get to that, okay, and that's one of the byproducts of the things we're talking about. From what was Third Coast opening and its survival, staying alive, and there's a lot of carnage going on around it, right?
Obviously, until this new statewide direction, it was a matter of where you are largely, and the prosecutor, of course, didn't make it his priority. Our locals accepted us. We did stay within some kind of reasonable time for constraints of behavior, but we did rely early on our own interpretation of the act, and knowing that just the affirmative defense was responsible for the emerging industry in California, thinking that could be emulated here too. So it was naive too to get started that way, but that's how we got going.
And this isn't a question about ego, because the only thing that really matters is just like still alive and kicking without any is there were
times is open under emergency rules now, and is
right there you go, right, like so state authorized to 100% state authorized to do whatever activity you've been doing, But my point being that there were times, of course, that everyone's level of concern was higher or lower, right? Would you agree with that? Like, we kind of pulled it back a little bit and trying to be less, because there were a lot of uncertainties during some periods of time, right?
Oh yeah.
Now, as this thing began to develop, a lot of people don't